Welcome back everybody. Today we are going to talk about one of my most favorite topics, once again. Guts, the protagonist of Berserk, is one of the most complex and tragic figures in manga and anime history. His entire life is marked by relentless pain, suffering and trauma, beginning even before his birth and continuing into his adulthood, where his very existence becomes a struggle for survival, revenge and ultimately meaning in a world filled with cruelty and darkness. And you know what I really enjoy? Fictional characters that are written in a way that you can immerse yourself in their experiences. But not only immerse yourself in their experience, but also find yourself in there. There are always some aspects of ourselves to be found in fictional characters we read about. And that might actually not always be that which we want to see in ourselves. But before we make a deep dive into the character of Guts today, I really want to mention the sponsor of this video, Walt's comic shop. It's a safe haven for manga and comic book lovers within the European Union. And for your first order above 40 euros, you will get free shipping with the code COSMICCOMICCORNER. So if there's a manga or a comic book you want to own, give them a chance. They provide an amazing service. Now back to the video. Guts' story begins in the most horrific of circumstances. He was born from the corpse of his mother, who had been hanged from a tree just before she gave birth. This grim birth foreshadows the life of suffering and violence that would follow. Found as a baby, still alive, but surrounded by death, Guts is discovered by a band of mercenaries. A woman named Chizu takes pity on the infant and adopts him as her own, raising him as best as she can in the hostile environment of a mercenary camp. But even this fleeting semblance of maternal care is short-lived, as she succumbs to illness when Guts is only a toddler, leaving him alone in a world already saturated with violence and instability. From these earliest days, Guts is abandoned and left with the sense that life is an unrelenting and hostile force. This sense of isolation, born from his very first experiences of life, will shape his interactions with the world for years to come. He's left in the care of Gambino, the cruel and abusive leader of the mercenaries, who resents Guts and never shows him any true affection. Growing up in a mercenary band, Guts' childhood is one of constant exposure to violence and death. He is forced to learn how to wield a sword, how to prevail on a battlefield and earn money to buy food, at an age where other children just fool around.
Hey Guts, why don't you use a smaller sword?
All while carrying a sword that is as large as he is.
We don't carry any baby-sized swords for kids here anyway.
But the brutality of his surroundings pales in comparison to the cruelty he faces at the hands of those who are supposed to care for him. Gambino, the man who raised him, treats Guts not as a child, but as a tool, a means to make money on the battlefield.
Bring me that meat.
Guts learns that in this world, love and trust are dangerous illusions, as Gambino's treatment of him grows increasingly hostile over time. The most devastating betrayal comes when Guts is still very young. In a sickening act of cruelty, Gambino sells Guts for a night to one of his men, Donovan. This night leaves Guts traumatized and with deep psychological scars.
I expected you to drop dead a long time ago.
The betrayal of Gambino, the one person who should have protected him, severs any last ties Guts may have had to childhood innocence. He learns in the most horrifying way that he cannot trust anyone, that he is truly alone in the world filled with predators. When Guts later confronts Gambino about the incident, Gambino only confirms his worst fears, revealing that he had always resented Guts for bringing bad luck, even blaming him for Shizu's death.
You were the one who should have died.
Guts kills Gambino in self-defense when the man tries to murder him in a drunken fit. This act forces Guts to flee the only home he has ever known, wandering into the world as a child with no family, no protection, and no sense of belonging. He's haunted by the memory of Gambino and the guilt of having killed him, despite Gambino's cruelty. From this moment, Guts becomes a lone warrior driven by survival.
A doomed child condemned by fate.
As a mercenary, he develops into a formidable fighter, known for his incredible strength and skill with the massive sword he wields. His size and strength make him a fearsome opponent. But his skill is not just physical. Guts has honed his survival instincts to a razor's edge. He survives, but he remains profoundly lonely, isolated from others by his traumatic past and his inability to trust anyone. During this time, Guts is a man consumed by anger and a deep sense of aimlessness. He fights because it is all he knows, the only thing that keeps him alive. He drifts from battlefield to battlefield, his soul growing more callous with every life he takes. The brutality of the world around him is mirrored by the growing rage within him, a rage that stems from the profound sense of abandonment and betrayal that has defined his life. Guts' life takes a sudden turn when he encounters the charismatic Griffith and joins the Band of the Hawk. For the first time in his life, Guts finds something resembling companionship and purpose. Griffith is unlike anyone Guts has ever met, driven, visionary, and magnetic. Under his leadership, the Band of the Hawk rises to prominence. And Guts, as his most trusted warrior, earns a reputation as the Raiders' captain, feared and respected on the battlefield. For a while, Guts experiences something close to happiness. He forms bonds with the other members of the Band of the Hawk, most notably with Casca. Though initially antagonistic toward him, Casca eventually comes to care for Guts, and the two share a complicated but deeply meaningful relationship. For the first time, Guts begins to feel that he is part of something larger than himself. Griffith's dream of attaining power and ruling a kingdom gives Guts a sense of direction and a purpose beyond mere survival. This fragile sense of belonging is shattered when Guts decides to leave the Band of the Hawk.
I told you long ago that you belong to me, Guts.
After years of fighting alongside Griffith, Guts realizes that he cannot live in someone else's shadow forever. He wants to find his own path, to live for himself, rather than for Griffith's dream.
What do you think you're doing?
Guts leaves the Band of the Hawk, believing that his departure will allow him to carve out his own identity.
Don't interfere.
Guts' decision to leave sets off a chain of events that lead to one of the most harrowing and traumatic moments of his life, the eclipse. In an unimaginable act of betrayal, Griffith sacrifices the members of the Band of the Hawk to ascend to godhood as one of the God Hand. Guts is forced to watch as Griffith, the man he once respected and admired, violates Casca in front of him, while he is held back, powerless to stop it.
You cannot escape.
The eclipse is the culmination of all of Guts' deepest fears and traumas: betrayal, helplessness, and the utter brutality of the world. Everything he had fought for, the friendships he had formed, and the fragile hope he had nurtured are ripped away in the most violent and horrifying way possible. Branded as a sacrifice, Guts is now hunted by demons, doomed to a life where evil pursues him relentlessly. The trauma of the eclipse leaves Guts with unimaginable psychological scars. He is consumed by hatred and vengeance, directed primarily at Griffith, now known as Femto. The violation of Casca deepens his sense of rage and loss, but the trauma is not just psychological. Guts is left physically scarred, missing an arm and an eye, with a brand on his neck constantly drawing evil to him.
Damn. No. They're back.
In the aftermath of the eclipse, Guts becomes the Black Swordsman. a man consumed by rage and revenge. His sole purpose becomes hunting down and killing Griffith, now a member of the God Hand, armed with a massive sword called the Dragon Slayer. On his quest for revenge, he slaughters every apostle that crosses his way. His whole journey becomes a bloody campaign of vengeance. And Guts' trauma continues to haunt him. He's plagued by nightmares of the eclipse, of the people he could not save, and of the betrayal that destroyed his world. His relationship with Casca, who lost her sanity after the horrors she endured, becomes another source of deep pain. Guts is torn between his desire to protect her and his overwhelming need for revenge, often pushing himself beyond the brink of exhaustion and sanity in his quest to destroy Griffith. Guts' journey as the Black Swordsman is a descent into darkness, as his hatred and trauma threaten to consume him completely. Once again, he becomes a lone wolf, fighting his battles alone for himself, pushing away those who might care for him, out of fear of losing them, just like he has lost his comrades before.
You're always watching you. Your body belongs to us.
The brand of sacrifice on his neck constantly reminds him that fate follows him, and the demons serving Griffith and the God Hand constantly pursue him. Despite his overwhelming trauma and the darkness that surrounds him, Guts slowly begins to rebuild his sense of humanity. His care for Casca, who is in a fragile mental state, becomes a driving force in his life as he seeks a way to restore her mind. Along the way, Guts finds new companions like Serpico, Farnese, Shirke and Isidro. And over time, their friendship becomes stronger. These relationships, though difficult for Guts to fully embrace because of his past traumas, provide a glimmer of hope. Guts is basically the embodiment of human will. He reflects what humans can be capable of. Berserk shows us a broken character who slowly opens up, and when he finally seems to attain peace with himself, he's knocked back down. So he flees into what he knows best: suffering, violence, and the fight for survival. Because after all, it is what he knows best. And because he knows it so well, there's nothing to be afraid of. He closes his heart to the world, again. Because this way he can't be hurt anymore. Right after the eclipse we go full circle. But the more the story continues, the more he begins to open up again. Guts' fight is not only against Griffith, he also has to fight himself. His thoughts, his fears, and his doubts. And ultimately, he's defying fate. And this is exactly why the character is so relatable. Because at some point, every human being is fighting against the odds. Everybody has been told at least once in their life that he or she can't do something. And defying what somebody might regard as our fate is something we can relate to. What draws us to fictional characters like Guts as well is our very own trauma. Because reading about the struggles of someone else and how they deal with it can ultimately change our very own perspective on things. And even though not everybody faces the same amount of trauma, in a way all of us have to deal with it. When Guts receives the Berserker armor, it can be perceived as a reflection of the struggle humans face with their own dark side. And sometimes we can pull us away ourselves, other times the people surrounding us pull us out of there. Of course, we've got to be willing for it to happen. And we need to be reminded what we are fighting for. Especially within the later chapters of the story, the duality between the traumatized self that just wants to rage and the self that just wants to heal and leave it all behind. It's that constant struggle that lets Guts almost look schizophrenic at times, particularly when he gets the Berserker armor. It remains to be seen where the story goes from here. All we know is that it seems like Guts no longer has to stand alone. Now I'd love to read about your speculations and theories where the character goes next. That being said, I will most definitely create some other deep dives on characters from Berserk. Because, let's be honest here, there are quite a lot of interesting characters in this story. That's it for today, and I'll see you next time.